Hello, my name's Olorotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and today I'm going to continue with my discussion in honor of Black History Month. And I will talk a bit about an American president. That's Martin Van Buren. He'd been vice president to Andrew Jackson, our seventh president. So Martin Van Buren was our eighth president. He was the first president and the only president who spoke English as a second language. His first language being Dutch, right? He was born and raised in New York, and of course, he was one of the founders of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, that's the same party we still have today. Of course, its program has changed dramatically, right? It's not how it's not it doesn't have the same program that it had when Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson created it. It was sort of the Jacksonian Democratic Party, and things have changed dramatically since then because this is now the Democratic Party is now it's the mainstay constituents, voters are black people, right? Black Americans, and um, Andrew Jackson had certainly been. He hadn't been, let's say, he wasn't pro-black, right? He'd been a slave owner. Martin Van Buren was not. He had not been a slave owner. Um, However, he was Andrew Jackson's vice president. President. Now, I'm not the reason why I'm discussing Martin Van Buren is not really because of his program or his creation of the Democratic Party, but it's because of his vice president. So he had an interesting vice president by the name of Richard Mentor Johnson. And now, Richard Mentor Johnson is the only president who was elected through the 12th Amendment. Of course, the 12th Amendment had been established after the tie in 1800 um, between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, right? So that was why the wait that was in 80 was it 1804 18 yeah in 1800. So the 12th Amendment was established, and Richard Mentor Johnson was the only person, vice president, who came into office through the 12th Amendment. Um, Let me see, was it 1800 or 1804 that there was the tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr? I'll check, I'll verify that, and I'll make that correction. One of those dates. But in any event, as I was saying, that my focus is on Richard Mentor Johnson, and not because he's the only president who was ever elected. He's the only vice president who came into office through the 12th Amendment, but because of another controversial matter. He is the only president who had a black common law wife, right? He openly had a black common law wife. She wasn't recognized as his common law wife because there were anti-miscegenation laws. Richard Mentor Johnson had represented Kentucky, right? The state of Kentucky, that's very interesting. Uh, Before I forget, there was something I also wanted to mention about the state of Kentucky. The Kentucky was actually the western part of Virginia. Kentucky had been part of Virginia, and so it was carved out of uh, the state of Virginia. So Virginia is often called like a mother state because about eight states actually were created from Virginia. So Kentucky was the first state to be created, carved out of Virginia. It was the western part of Virginia, and so it became was admitted into the Union as the 15th state on June the 1st, 1792, as the 15th state. Vermont had been the 14th. So Richard Mentor Johnson had a common law. Um, she was his mistress, and she had children for him. But he treated this African American woman in a different way. He tried to present her as his common law wife, but of course there were anti-miscegenation laws in the South, in the slaveholding South. Virginia had since passed, I think, its first anti-miscegenation laws around 1691 in the 1690s. Soon after Maryland had passed its anti-miscegenation laws, I think in the 1640s or thereabouts. Uh, and of course, Virginia first created the law of partus sequitur ventrum, which meant that um, children inherited their slave status from their mothers, right? So slavery came from the womb. That's partus sequitur ventrum. And so Virginia, the southern slaveholding states, had now created this demarcation. It created chattel slavery, which was organized, which was designed according to race, right? So the races were now divided, and the black people in the slaveholding states were chattel, they were chattel property, right? They were chattel slaves. So, and there was anti-miscegenation laws which prevented white people and black people from marrying, right? Um, Now, in spite of the anti-miscegenation laws, right, it turns out, of course, we know that the the white slave owners, right, they they tended to have relationships, cohabit, sexual intercourse with their African slaves, with their black slaves, right? So it was one of those things that okay, uh, people engaged in the activity, and there were mixed race children, everywhere in the South. But the slave owning master, right, white man, was not supposed to acknowledge it, and even though people knew, they weren't supposed to acknowledge uh, any relationship that that their slaves, their black slave women, were their mistresses. It didn't matter, or that their children were theirs. So under the law, the children could not be recognized as the children of the slave master. Now, of course, even in the time of Thomas Jefferson, of course, today we all know Thomas Jefferson was indeed having he had a long-term relationship with Sally Hemings since the time she was even as young as was it 14 years old, and she had several children for him. Now, a journalist by the name, a Scottish journalist who immigrated to America because there was a warrant for his address for his arrest. There was a warrant for his arrest in Great Britain because he'd made some defamatory comments against the government. So he fled to America, and his name was James Callender, and he soon started writing on behalf of Thomas Jefferson, and he was excoriating, uh, you know, John Adams administration, right, the frenemy of Thomas Jefferson. However, when uh, John Adams had locked up James Callender, because John Adams' administration passed the Alien and Seditions Act of 1798, and so you couldn't anybody who criticized the government could be imprisoned, right? And so James Callender was thrown in jail. He was lucky he wasn't deported because the government also had the president also had the power to deport any foreigner, any foreign-born person he deemed to be dangerous. But I guess he preferred to lock James Callender in jail, and so James Callender was locked up in prison. But when he was released, and Thomas Jefferson subsequently became president, he defeated John Adams. Uh, James Callender expected that Thomas Jefferson would reward him with a cabinet position or some kind of government official, some kind of position in the government. And instead, Thomas Jefferson distanced himself from James Callender. And so James Callender exposed the fact that Thomas Jefferson had children through Sally Hemings, and he'd taken her, as his mistress. So Abigail Adams, who was very close to Thomas Jefferson, right, asked Thomas Jefferson if it was true that he had, a relationship with Sally Hemings, and I learned this from reading the book John Adams, and and you know, and I think also that's from David McCullough, and also Ron Chenow's Alexander Hamilton, both great books. Uh, However, Thomas Jefferson denied it. He said no, there was no truth to it. So that was what happened in the South. It was common for Southern planters, slave owners, to have relationships with their African slave women, and they had children by them. This was true of William Henry Harrison. They said he had several children, as many as four, with his female slaves. In fact, there's also there are rumors about James Madison as well, that even though James Madison had no legal biological children, it is speculated, there's a rumor that he had a child, he fathered a child with a slave woman he grew up with, and unfortunately, it is even said that she was his half sister. That he fathered the child with her when they were both young. So that was the horror. These were part of the horrors of the institution of slavery. The reason why I'm doing this video is, in fact, the title is America's Fixation on Race. I had seen something on social media. There's somebody I follow, and somebody had critiqued this person on social media, that they're always talking about race, right? And it appears as this inordinate fixation on race, right? And it's true. I guess sometimes one feels that way because they're always talking about race, but you've got to probably be part of the mainstream, or the maybe the white majority culture, the culture that is that has never been victim of American racism, because and also so. And if one's a new immigrant, right? Because I've heard this from some new immigrants, black immigrants as well. Um, but of course they've got these rose tinted glasses they have on, and it makes them really Panglossian, because they haven't gotten to see, to understand, to have the full experience of America. And when I talk about America, obviously, I'm a naturalized American citizen. Americans made me a citizen, right? I clearly love America because I came as a foreigner, and America welcomed me. I succeeded, right? I achieved what it is that I came to do. And then on top of it, Americans now made me an American citizen. Well, I'm a citizen now, I have rights. So it's just things that I'm free to talk about. Uh, a lot of what I talk about race, I to be honest, I hadn't experienced a lot of it. My full, because I'd never been to jail before I became a citizen. I was raided in my home. I'd never been raided by cops before. I was raided in my home, handcuffed to a gurney, naked, in a hospital, in a suburban hospital, right, with white people surrounding me in a lobby, looking at my exposed body. I was completely naked, not a stitch of clothing, and I was handcuffed like a criminal. I was removed from my home based on a lie. I was assaulted by the police. I'm not a criminal. I don't sell drugs. I don't. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't rob anybody. In fact, I was robbed. I was assaulted. I was all bloodied up, right? And this only happened to me because I'm a black man, and I was living in a majority white building in a majority white county. And apparently, when they spread false information, I was a victim of a swatting. I've done videos talking about these things before. I'm just talking about, I'm narrating my own experience, right, as a black person who is not a descendant of African slaves in America, who's one of the new Americans, right? I'm an American citizen. I'm one of those new Africans who are American citizens. And for those new African Americans, right? Those new citizens, right, who haven't been given the full American experience, so that they can, take off their rose tinted glasses and see that race is intricately weaved into the tapestry of America, right? That's why they say it's structural racism. I'm just giving my own experience, my wake up call. And then I was locked up in jail. All my rights, my constitutional rights, were just denied me. And then I got to see, at least in jail for the first time, because I knew it academically, I got to see that, well, in a majority white county that I lived in, majority of the black people, almost 80% at the time I was locked in, were blacks, right? It was like they would just cut black people up and they were just locking them up in this county. That's in Montgomery County. So when you see these things and you see these, um, and of course the treatment I got, because I was in my home. These police who came to raid me, they had no arrest warrant. I had no arrest, no criminal history, nothing. I hadn't committed a crime. It was just a swatting, false police report. And I was dehumanized. And this has been 3 years that the county has taken my life. So I'm getting to see um, what descendants of African slaves still here who have no other options. I'm getting to see what they experience, because racism, um, from the beginning, was invested in, the nation invested in racism from the beginning of America. So for people who say, well, people are so fixated on race. Yes, America is fixated on race. But the solution, isn't to, from the beginning of American society. And for those people who are, who have, again, this quixotic notion that the way to end racism is to pretend racism doesn't exist and it will go away. That, well, there are all these laws now and everybody's equal, right? There are anti-discrimination laws and all these things work. Well, the point is that these things don't work, and there's always a blowback, right? I've talked about the pendular phenomena in race relations in America. And for those, because there are actually people who think by pretending race doesn't exist, that we're all equal, that blacks and whites have the same equal experience in America, and that the KKK is dead, and the whole old racism, the structural racism that existed, because I'm trying to get to. I'm going to continue with my discussion on Richard Mentor Johnson, the vice president. For those who try and talk and deflect and act like, well, all those institutions that enforced racism in society, in American society, that they're all gone. After all, slavery's ended. But remember, well, by the way, 13th Amendment, slavery ended in society, but you could still be enslaved as punishment for a crime according to the 13th Amendment. And so they're locking people up. I saw it. They're locking people up and enslaving them in American jails, right? And so who are the majority of people locked up in America? Again, it's black people. It only constitutes 13% of the population. And there's a misrepresentation, right? A false narrative that blacks are inherently criminal and that's why they're being locked up in jail. And that's not true, right? That's just another part of the false narrative. And so again, for those who think, well, the way to address, the racism that was weaved into the structure of American society from the beginning, from the foundation, from before the foundation of the country, is to ignore it, right? That is just like, I like analogies. That is just like saying, well, again, remember that, racism is part of, it's weaved intricately, it's part of the tapestry of American society. And for those who want to just put on those rose-colored glasses and say, well, ignore it, it's a solution, it'll go away, right? Pretend it's not there so we can just all get along, right? It's like saying, well, somebody's got cancer. You discover that you got, somebody discovers that they have cancer, and they're saying the solution to cancer in the body of someone, right, is to just pretend that it's not there, right? Of course, that's no prophylactic at all. It's not a prophylactic. It's not going to do anything. Your condition is just going to get worse because it's going to metastasize, right? It's going to metastasize, right? It's going to just keep getting worse until it kills the person. So the solution is to be aggressive about the cancer, right? And this is not to be to sound insensitive to people who experience cancer or anything, but racism in America is a cancer to the society, right? It is, and the way to deal with it is to aggressively. America invested heavily in racism from the beginning, from the foundation of the nation, right? And ignoring it is not divesting from racism, right? It has to America the way to counter it, to counter the racism that was because when the country invested in racism in the society, it created consequences. There are already consequences, and they're real, right? They're byproducts as a fallout. They're real, and so now, in order to address that fallout, is to be aggressive and have programs that can counter it, right? Anti-racist programs that can eliminate, racism in society. So let me go back to the story of Richard Mentor Johnson that I was talking about. So Richard Mentor Johnson had a woman who was his common law wife, and he took her as his common law wife. Her name was Julia Chin. She was a black woman, and she had kids for him, 2 daughters. Interestingly, Richard Mentor Johnson recognized them as those daughters as his legal children. He sent them to expensive schools. He tried to introduce them to society and all of that. But society, of course, the Southern society frowned against it. Now, he was elected as vice president, but come 1840, because of the way he tried to present, the slave woman who was his mistress as a common law wife against, the laws in the South, they didn't re-elect him to be vice president for Martin Van Buren come 1840. So Martin Van Buren ran for the second term without a running mate. He didn't have a running mate because his party refused to endorse Richard Mentor Johnson because he continued to put out his black slave woman as his common law wife and continued to recognize the daughters she gave him as his children. But they couldn't inherit from him, so what he could do was give them money while he was alive, but the law would never allow those daughters, when he died, to inherit his estate. So that was a challenge of slavery, right? So one of the challenges things that slavery created. Now, from the foundation, again, I've talked about the anti-miscegenation laws, the laws of Parta Sequitur Ventrum that was created in 1662, and then even in our Constitution of 1787, it's, the Constitution protected slavery. There was a 3/5 clause. I've done a video talking about that, so I'm not going to get into it. So slavery was protected in the Constitution, and then later acts as well. There was the Missouri Compromise of 1820 that made, the North with 11 states free, and then the Southern states slaveholding. So slavery was protected, as Justice John Marshall Harlan said in his dissent. John Marshall Harlan, known as the Great Dissenter, he said in his dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson, That was the law that the court decision that established separate but equal, and green lighted sanctioned segregation, legal segregation, and Jim Crow. John Marshall Harlan said that slavery and the slave master were protected by the nation, right? And in dismantling all the protections of the Reconstruction era acts, right? I've done videos talking about that, so I'm not going to discuss them here. That in dismantling them, that it would, it would just, it was like it was going to be stripping the civil and constitutional rights of Black Americans, and this was coming from a man who had a half brother. Again, he also came from a family. His father also was a politician. He had been a senator from, was I think Kentucky as well. He'd been was a Secretary of State from Kentucky, and he had an older half brother, um, Robert. Right, his name was Robert. He was a slave. He was born a slave, but the father freed him. But the father raised him, tried to raise him with the rest of the brothers as well, treated him well. And eventually he moved to California, and this brother became wealthy, right? He accumulated, during the gold rush of 1849, he accumulated about $50,000 from the gold rush. And, he was wealthy. $50,000 back in 1849, that's the equivalent of over $2 million in today's dollars, right? The value in today's dollars. So he became wealthy, and he even supported his white brothers. He would give his white brothers money. And so Justice uh, John Marshall Harlan of the U.S. Supreme Court, he understood the complexity of race in America and in the mindset of the white majority, right? And he understood the divisions, right? The insidious and invidious harms that it created, because he had a brother. He probably had, these mixed feelings about his half brother, who was, who'd been a slave, but he knew he was a man of accomplishment, because that half brother was an accomplished person despite being a slave, right? Having been a slave, he became a wealthy man, more prosperous than the rest of his white brothers. And he I've done a video talking about his brother, so I'm not going to discuss that here. So he did. That's Justice John Marshall Harlan. He talked about the necessity of having the nation protect, Black Americans from the harms of, of people who had been pro-slavery, because he said that the slave master and slavery were protected by the nation, right? There's a distinction. There's a formerly marginalized people, and this was something that even Ulysses S. Grant, who was president, our 18th president, and he was a commander, I think general, who won who preserved the Union and defeated the Confederate Army. He understood. He said there was going to be always this animosity from um, the white Southerners against the blacks. So that initially he tried to champion that Black people, that a state of another territory, that's the Dominican Republic, right? It was Santo Domingo then, that it should be annexed by the U.S. and made a state. That it should be a state where Black people moved to there, resettled there, and so they could succeed and develop and self-govern without the invidious, the pernicious influence of racism. So he understood that racism was still going to be there, harming Black people. And so this is something that, this is Black History Month. It's a reason why I'm talking about it. And, I'm just trying to educate us on how slavery was already in the foundation. There was a lot of investment in racism after Plessy versus Ferguson, apart from just when slavery was there. Racism didn't start with slavery, and it didn't end with slavery. So when slavery ended and the government tried to create, the government created the Department of Justice. That's President Ulysses Grant. He created it in order to eliminate the KKK, right? Because the KKK terrorized black people, intimidated them. So Ulysses Grant used federal troops and the Department of Justice to eliminate the KKK. And however, the courts now supported the South, and then there was the Compromise of 1877, which meant, President Rutherford B. Hayes withdrew the federal support for support protecting black people and left black people in the South at the mercy of Southern whites. And then there was the Plessy versus Ferguson. There was a new investment of the government in racism, right? By saying, when they said separate but equal. This was for about 70 years, right? The government created a parallel economy, right? So if they created a white school, they would create a school for black. So white and black kids did not go to the same place. If they had separate bathrooms. They had a bathroom for black people, bathroom for white people. They had buses for, they had everything was separated in the South. So that was a lot of investment in racism. So to suddenly say, well, because there are these anti-discrimination laws which don't even work, right? They're just there, they're not enforced. To say the way to address it, racism, is to ignore racism, right? And that's never been the case in the U.S. history. America's always invested in race. It's been 400 years of investing in racism in America, right? The way to remove racism is to invest in anti-racism, right? See, the reason why I had even initially talked about the situation of Richard Mentor Johnson and his concubine, his black slave concubine, without a doubt, he probably, they're probably, many times black men, when we consider relationships between a slave master and his black slave, his African slave, we think about it as a loveless relationship, that there could not possibly be love between these people, especially because, the black woman was under duress. She had no capacity. She had no free will. She was a property of the white guy, right? It's just like somebody, these pedophiles that have been having relationships with kids. There's no, it's under duress. It's the child has no capacity. There can't be consent. There can't be anything mutual, right? The older person is just manipulating and abusing the younger person. Now, today, the interracial relationships between white men and black women. And you see on social media, the visceral reaction for most people is to remind people of slavery. Those conditions are different. It is possible for black women to legitimately love white men. It's possible for white men to legitimately love black women, right, today. Because, look, the thing is, we're all human beings, and that's one of also the beauties about America. Were there white people in Nigeria when I grew up in Lagos? Yes. I had a neighbor when I first lived in Ikoyi as a child. I have a picture of it, right? Me, my sister, and my neighbor were kids. I had Indian neighbors, right? I had Chinese neighbors, but I never thought of a relationship with any person like that. But in America, it's in America that you find that, the proximity. You see younger people, you see them, dating one another because of interest, because we're human beings, right? I see these annoying clips sometimes, and it's because of the fixation of racism, the fixation on racism, on race. There's no denying that. There's no escaping America's fixation on race. You see these things where they're doing a survey and they're asking, oh, do you like black men? Do you like white men? Do you like, that's so ridiculous. All races are attracted to all races. That's the reality. So it's the investment in racism that makes it appear that this is like an aberration for a black man or an Asian woman to be attracted to a black man, or for a white woman to be attracted to a black man, or vice versa, right? Or for a Spanish person to be attracted to a black man, or vice versa. Or, they're human beings. You stay close enough to somebody, and you understand them, you learn them. You're going, regardless of your preference. If you think, well, you're only attracted to black women because you grew up with black women. If you see an Asian woman and you're interacting and you're close, because you're human beings, you end up there are other things that are working, other variables like chemicals, biological processes that are working, right? And we're human beings, right? And you see that attraction will develop. It'll just take its natural course. But this thing is like, it's like extraordinary, it's like fanciful, it's like something outrageous, outlandish, because of the nation's initial original investment in racism, right? In race, right? They created, look, if black men or black were never attracted to white women, or white women were never attracted to black men, or white men would, America would never have created, there would be no need to create those anti-miscegenation laws that the racist state of Maryland first created, right? In the 18th century. Was it in the, when was it? I can't remember. Anyway, that was prior to independence. There will be no reason for America to create those racist laws, right? Those anti-miscegenation laws. If they were not attracted, there was no attraction to one another. There would be no need, right? So yeah. So from the beginning, there was already an investment in race, and there's in order to address that, there's got to be an investment in anti-racism, right? Anti-racist programs. Without a doubt, they're racist, still in America. But the way the nation works is like, well, half can be racist and half can be not racist. That's basically how it is. It's not to say, well, all white people are racist. No, I've done other videos just to stress that out, that not all white people are racist. After all, I went to school in Troy, Alabama. I talked about how I lived with white people in the middle of nowhere, right? White people from Troy, Alabama, in the middle of nowhere, and I was safe, right? They'd invite me to their home and eat. People wonder that they invited you into their home and you ate with them. It's, hey, come on. It happens, right? And black people can be racist or, right, look, I'm from Nigeria. The proxy of race, right? Tribalism, that's proxy for racism in Nigeria. When black, so that's like black on black racism, right? We have internalized racism as well. So it's called tribalism in Africa or in Nigeria or wherever. So anyway, this has gotten long, and I will do more videos. And again, this is in honor of Black History Month. I will keep you posted. Thank you.